at a time. Yeah, this is tea time. Yeah, making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference. One cup at a time. Tea time. Yeah. Tea time.
Well, good afternoon and welcome back to Tea Time. We are here for the second show of the day. That's right. This morning we had Judy and Michael in the studio talking about seniors and technology. Now this afternoon we have a topic that may trigger some of you. So we're just going to put a little disclaimer out there and we're going to get prepared to serve you a strong TEA this afternoon with Jason Shiers. So the disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith, however, may bring forward dialogue and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment in taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is significant to note that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about this disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Ms. Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I, Ms. Liz, welcome you. And should you find that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect that and we'll see you at a later show at a later date and time. And again, all Tea Times are on Thursday this year, unless it's a rescheduled Tea Time. So let me get Jason in here and let's have a good old strong cup of tea. But this afternoon's tea, we're going to be talking about mental health, addictions, really some hard topics. So if you feel that it's going to trigger you, please, I will not be offended if you do not tune in. So let's get Jason in here. I'm just going to do a quick bio. So Jason Shiers is a certified physical therapist and certified transformative coach that has gone through the full journey from childhood trauma to addictions and mental health problems to jail and psychiatric care to 12-step recovery and becoming a professional helping others. His story is painful and eye-opening, showing how the system pathologizes normal human response to tragic life circumstances, and also showing how there really is a way out for everyone. So let's get Jason in here, and I'm going to grab a sip of tea. So welcome, Jason.
Hi, thank you. Nice to be here. Nice to be. I like the intro. You know, it was great.
Oh, well, thank you. I always try to do a little special for all of my guests. So, Jason, if you'd like to share a little bit from where it began and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story, and there's so many facets to that, and so many sort of different avenues, you know. And it all started, I guess, with the loss of my father when I was a small child. He was killed in an accident, and when I was 5 years old, and I think from there, life I guess as I would imagine it to be, for a small child in a family unit, completely changed and became something very serious very quickly. So food was my first drug, if you want. It was the escape from myself. It was the escape from my experience. It was the escape from my grief. Food was reliable, consistent, heartwarming, comforting, at the time, which is what I needed. So I went off down that avenue of kind of struggling with food and compulsively eating. And I guess it makes sense that if a small child is compulsively eating consistently, then he's going to balloon in weight, which is what I did. So it became obvious on the outside that there was something not right. So my mum, bless her, in all her attempts to soothe me and help me feel better, she took me to professionals to get me some help, which happened to be the psychiatric system. And because back then in the early 80s or late 70s even, it's kind of like there was no internet. You didn't just pull out your phone and search for help with grief. It's kind of like you picked up what we call a yellow pages. Don't know if you had that in the US. And it's like a list of local businesses, and I guess you kind of searched under mental health or something related, and she found maybe she even called the doctors, I don't know, and they pointed us into the medical system, which is what psychiatry is. And I was medicated for depression at that time, and that was my start in the psychiatric system, of being sort of entered into the system. I was then medicated for weight control, with diet pills, what we would call diet pills, today, which didn't really do much because like food was my solution. It was the comfort, it was the peace in my life, it was the reliable, consistent friend that I'd found to cope with my grief. So trying to medicate my experience or to change my relationship with food via tablets was never going to work because I needed the food more than anything, because otherwise inside I was full of grief and emptiness and loneliness and separation, and I just felt out of place in the world and wondered what on earth this thing was that people were calling life, and how come I'd been dealt such a bad one, in this experience that I'd had. And by this time my behavior was pretty chaotic. I was being expelled from schools. I was stealing money. I was committing crime. I was pretty outrageous, I guess my mum would say. And she'd lost control of me, that's for sure. So, things just went consistently downhill from there into drugs, into addiction. I found drugs as a very young teenager. And it was the solution. It was the ultimate solution, finding drugs. It was the very first time in my life since I'd started thinking at approximately 5 or 6 years old, to when I first found drugs at 13 or 14 years old. It was like the mind quietened. It went quiet. It was a busy mind. It was full of overthinking and stress. And I'm sure anyone listening knows what that means, to be an overthinker, to be stressy, to be constantly worrying. That's what my life was like. I was worrying about myself and the world and everything. Everyone else was, I had a lot of issues, so to speak. Let's say that, my relationship to myself, my relationship to the rest of the world. But when I found drugs, that all went away in an instant. Straight away, it was gone, and it was like that's why I say it was the ultimate answer to everything, And so I was never going to stop. I wasn't planning to stop. I was planning to continue because I just found the answer to life. It's kind of like it was the solution. Drugs were never the problem. There was always the solution. And if you think about it that way, that addiction is actually is an intelligence of the system. It is that we find a way to cope in adverse circumstances. That is just how it works. We always find a way. Any child born into any adversity, going through any traumatic event, finds a way to be okay in the depths of adversity. The same way I found food, it was an intelligence of the system. The same way I found drugs, it was a further intelligence of the system. Yet it's pathologized in Western medicine and typical psychological understandings that it's somehow a disease or a label or a diagnosis, that something that's broken and needs fixing, but actually it's nothing broken. It's actually intelligence of the system. So, I was already deep into that world then. I was medicated, I was diagnosed, I started to get labels, started to get diagnosed as having different personality disorders, different things, and started to go to jail, commit crime, get into all sorts of chaotic things, just to escape myself and just to feed my addiction, I guess, until I found rehabilitation and 12 steps at the age of 23, when I was just told that I had this disease, and I was quite naive. I was desperate. I was desperate and I was naive. I was naive to the world of psychology and psychiatry. I was desperate because I'd been on the streets, been to prison, been taking drugs, and I was empty inside, so I would have done anything to belong, So when people told me you have this unexplainable disease, and it wasn't the first diagnosis that I'd had, wasn't the first label that I'd been given. And you can never drink or use drugs again. And you need to go to meetings for the rest of your life every single day or something. I just said, okay, I'll do anything, because I was desperate and I was empty. And I wanted to belong. I wanted to be accepted, So somebody told me something that had actually shown me some love and attention, because it was the first time in my life I'd received some love and attention. I was going to go along with it. I was not going to argue with that. So I did. I went to meetings for 22 years after that, and believing that I was an addict and that there was something broken in me. I had this unexplainable disease called addiction, along with all these other psychiatric diagnoses. But what happened was, after I went into rehab, I stopped drugs and alcohol. I was quite sure I didn't want to do that anymore. I knew. But I didn't stop with everything else. It was like addiction is like a whack-a-mole. You go into rehab for drugs and you start eating food. And you put the food down, you start picking up sex and relationships. You stop the relationships, you start chasing money. Because like I said all along, addiction was intelligence. It was dealing with a further, deeper issue, but that was never addressed. That was never addressed. The 12 steps gives you a way of coping, but it really doesn't help you understand who you are or how your experience is created from that perspective. So unbeknown to me, I picked up food, I ballooned in weight, I gained 150 pounds in 12 weeks. Before I knew it, I was 350 pounds, going to meetings, smiling, saying my life was great because I'm not taking drugs anymore, but I'm 350 pounds. I look at myself in the mirror and I just want to commit suicide because I feel so bad about my body and my life, completely unknown. I didn't know what was going on. I was just oblivious to that. And so then my progressive relationship with food and diet and the gym and crime and chaos and all sorts of stuff, I kept going to meetings and saying my life was great because that's what people seem to do. And that's what I was told I needed to do. But really things just got worse on the inside. They didn't get better. My internal relationship with myself and my reflection with the rest of the world was at complete odds consistently. I felt in that committee that I talked about when I was younger that went quiet when I first took drugs, that was there. It was present in my life. So I had this what would you call it, difficult relationship, challenging relationship with people, the world, and myself. I always felt challenging. I was always trying to fix myself because I believed I was broken. I was always at odds with somebody because they were mirroring or reflecting back to me something that was at dis-ease within myself, and that's kind of how I lived for a long time in some form of escapism, whatever form of escapism I could find that was not going to be drugs or alcohol, I would do it. And that's why I became a psychotherapist, because I went to therapy. People said to me at meetings, "Oh, you've got some real problems. It's kind of like not just addiction. You've got other problems." And I was like, "Okay, what do I need to get a therapist?" People used to say. I was like, "Okay," so I got a therapist, and I went to therapy, and it was quite nice to be heard. It was quite nice to just to be sitting with somebody for an hour who seemed to show some interest in your life. And I thought, oh, maybe if I did this therapy thing, I could fix myself. You know, that's kind of, I could actually get a better perspective. And if I really, because I knew I was clever, I'd been to private school. This was nothing to addiction, was nothing to do with intelligence. The two things are completely not mutually exclusive. You know, I was very intelligent. I still suffered in the way that I did. So I kind of knew, and I looked up and I found I did a master's degree in as well as many other qualifications in a psychodynamic therapy called transactional analysis. You know, which is a quite complicated theory, to be honest, and I spent years going in and out of kind of looking at my trauma and my past and my childhood and all these things, and I shed a lot of tears, and I felt darkness, a lot of darkness, because I kept digging into the past, and I somehow thought that I could get a new relationship with the past. That's what I was taught. That's what I believed. Again, naively, not knowing anything. It took me a lot of years to really come to an understanding of human behavior and the human mind, of going in and out of this stuff, for like nearly 30 years, I guess, now, to really say I've got a good understanding of what happens, to people who struggle. So back then, naively, I kind of did this stuff and got one training after another. And at the end of each one, I kind of thought, I don't know anything about happiness. How can I help anyone else? It's like I got the qualification. Here's your certificate. You can go and help people now. And I thought, yeah, I do have a conceptual framework and a theoretical understanding of what I've been taught, but I don't know where the light switch is. I don't know how to find happiness for myself. I don't really know what joy is, for no good reason. I knew joy for getting a new car or joy for getting some money in the bank, but I didn't really know joy, what was really joy was, I didn't wake up full of happiness and contentment. I woke up full of dread. I woke up like full of what I call a flawed mind, full of ideas about myself, of being broken, damaged, having to be in therapy for years. I'd already been in therapy for years at this point. I've been in recovery for years. I hadn't taken drugs for a long time, but I was still completely miserable and acting out on my addiction in different ways, and at this point, because I was a professional, I had to keep it quiet. It became even more difficult to talk about the way I behaved and the way I thought and the things that I believed about myself and the rest of the world with anyone, because I had this professional front to keep. And it's like, and I knew these other therapists and they were the same. It's kind of like in public, they would talk a great story about addiction and how they were recovering. But in private, when they told you about their lives, it was just as messed up as mine was. They were behaving in ways that were not really, showed they hadn't really found any answers, in the same way that I hadn't really found any answers to suffering. I was doing something. The bottom line is I was doing something I didn't want to do. I was behaving in ways I didn't want to behave. I didn't know why, and I couldn't stop doing it,
So Jason, you said this all started when your dad passed away. Do you think that was due to trauma and grief that started it all, or?
Yeah, and from my perspective now, absolutely is related to that. Any form of adversity, any form of jarring experience, intense adversity to the nervous system of a small child that hasn't yet developed any rational or cognitive ability to even understand, and isn't allowed to feel and grieve, isn't taught how to feel and grieve, after that experience, will be just repressed. It's kind of like, and then we innocently kind of find ways to cope, like I did with food, and then all that other stuff is still going on there. It's kind of like, and habitually it just becomes a way of being in the world as we grow. And that, and the belief in myself, as if we go on further, I can talk more about spiritual stuff, but it's like,
let's dig deeper, because the story is what has gotten you to where you are today, right? Like, and I really want the viewers and the audience to understand that we have to have a hard life in order to make a better life. We need those hard moments to grow, and you've taken all of like your therapy and changed it and made a positive outlook, where a lot of people will do therapy and they'll be like, you know what, I don't even want to go near that anymore. Where you've actually went deeper and started studying it. Have you always been interested in the human mind and behaviors? And
I mean, you could call addiction the lost man's way to enlightenment. I sometimes say that, it's kind of like you said, you need the contrast or the polarity of experience, the darkness to seek the light. You need the suffering to seek the joy. It's kind of like, if your life is just mediocre, you're probably just going to go along with it. It's like I'd had that much suffering that I was just interested in feeling better. It's kind of like, it was that simple, really. I wanted to feel better. And from there, my growing interest and my love of other people suffering, developed in those processes. Love of helping people that are suffering or who had suffered the things that I had struggled with, was where my passion grew.
Well, do you feel that because you went through this trauma, you're able to help people a little bit deeper than somebody who hasn't gone through it?
I think many people think that, and I think I thought that for a while. I don't think having suffered gives you any ability to help other people, but I think having suffered and taken it upon yourself to learn and understand your suffering, and having got to a point where you can truly say you have experienced joy and happiness for no good reason, and then you can point other people to that, is important. Because I think many people train as a therapist, and I think Western psychological theories, and particularly the medical psychiatric model, don't offer any solution to people. In fact, they keep people somewhat perpetuated in the story of themselves, as I did. I'm not pointing the finger here, because I did this too. It's like, I don't think they offer any full solutions. I think they offer a therapeutic space for people to be seen and heard, but that is not in itself a solution. It's like, but when you combine Western psychological theories and Eastern spiritual practice and understanding, there's a whole new space that's available for people to see themselves from a different perspective. And that's kind of what I did, and that's where I feel qualified to, to be able to point people to their true nature, or to a space or a place of happiness and contentment that's always possible for anyone, regardless of what they've been through.
We have a question here for you, Jason, about your psychiatric therapy. So, being in the psychiatric ward, how did that affect you as an individual growing up?
It's like I just said, it was just another label, another how I describe the development and our understanding of ourselves, this thing we're in that we call life, is that, like, we're born in the eyes of perfection. We don't actually know we're a body, a baby, a boy or a girl. We've got no name. It's we're just born as a seamless flow of sensations and perceptions. Then we get given a name, and separation starts. I have a name, you have a name, we're two separate people. It's kind of like, and then from there the identity is developed. It's kind of like, and the identity, like, a child is not born knowing what eating disorders are. It's kind of like, it's installed, it's given information from somebody with more information. It's like, so all the information, what I call the programming, is installed, based on your level of adversity, or the amount of love that you get and connection. So being in the psychiatric ward was another, what I call, layer of wallpaper, like over the top of my identity, another thing that was broken, another thing that was wrong with me, another thing that I had to work out, something else where I had to be removed, from society, and sort of given medication and so on and stuff like that, because I was not okay. Someone else had to make me okay. So it all contributed to this flawed ideas I had of myself being this broken individual that really had no hope.
Do you feel that by acting out, you were looking for, like, attention, affection, and, like, somebody to hear you? Because you mentioned when you first started sharing your story that you wanted to be heard. And
Yeah.
I totally get that, because as a survivor of abuse and trauma myself, I always wanted to be heard. I wanted my voice to be heard. And I'm hearing that in your story as well, Jason, that you wanted to be heard as a child. And sometimes we act out so that we can be seen and heard, right?
Absolutely, it's true. Like, it's an energetic experience of the body that comes out in the way that we behave, speak, or act. It's kind of like that. There's a part of us that feels unseen, right? It's kind of like, and that is experienced as a contraction or an energy in the body. Like, you might feel, if you feel unseen in a conversation, you'll notice, oh, my chest tightened, or I felt a lump in my throat. Something happened. I felt an energy in my body, and then we start to think, we project our thinking onto the other person. They haven't seen me, they haven't heard me. And then we feel the emotions of it. It's kind of like, this is the experience that's consistently happening when we are unseen, right? I mean, the trauma is unseen. That the person, if we're abused, it's kind of like the person abusing is not seeing us, it's kind of like in that way. So we completely embody that experience of being unseen. And then it grows into adult life where it keeps being triggered in everyday conversations or work or relationships, particularly, it's kind of like, so then we're constantly longing to be seen, it's always there. So it's always created in that early childhood experience, but then shows up in adult relationships,
So what age were you when you finally realized, okay, this is enough and I need help?
Well, I guess there's multiple levels of that. It's kind of like, I mean, at 23, I went into rehab and 12 steps, and I decided this is enough. I'd had enough. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired of going to jail. I was sick and tired of committing crime. I was sick and tired of not being able to walk down the street without being arrested. That's one level, and then there was multiple times that happened, starting therapy, starting new trainings, doing things like the Hoffman process, the Landmark Forum, all these silent meditations, retreats, looking for myself, basically. All of this is everything that I've ever talked about since the experience of losing my dad has been looking for myself. And that's what all human beings do. They search for themselves. They innocently look on the outside, trying to fix something on the inside. That's what I did. And, I didn't actually find that myself. I didn't have a connection to myself on purpose. Didn't know I was looking for myself. I don't think anybody knows they're looking for themselves. And in fact, we often hear the phrase, all the answers are within, but no one actually knows what that means. Usually it's kind of like, is it within where? Like in my leg or my elbow? Or what?
Right.
It's kind of like, whereabouts? How do I find
Like
it?
it can come out at any time, right?
Yeah. So, and life is always guiding us back to ourselves. It's kind of like that's. I love the saying, you can never get enough of what you don't want, because everything that is annoys you is a reflection for you to look inwardly at something that's lacking within yourself, or apparently lacking.
Yeah.
So I eventually had an experience where, after having a long list of therapeutic qualifications and psychological qualifications and letters after my name and years in practice helping people and so on, I still wasn't happy. And I came across an understanding of something called the Three Principles, which was I'd call a psycho-spiritual explanation for our true nature that was founded by someone called Sydney Banks, who's now dead. But he articulated his understanding of our true nature. And I met a guy called Michael Neal, who was a coach in Los Angeles. And I ended up very serendipitously at his house, like completely non-coincidentally. It's kind of like that I ended up there. And, for the very first time in my life, and this is one of the things that I offer to everyone, it's kind of like I listened and I thought, there's nothing wrong with me. The first time, like there was something deep inside me that said, there's nothing wrong with me. I just think, that's it. It's kind of like I have a lot of thinking about myself. I have a lot of thinking about my world. I have a lot of thinking about my life. I have a lot of thinking about my weight. Now, I haven't talked about some things. My relationship with food was that bad. I had 7 cosmetic surgeries trying to change the outside of my body to fix the inside, to make me happy, including being put to sleep in a third world country because it was cheaper and I was desperate, to feel better. My relationship with food, my body was completely a mess. And that's kind of some of the desperate extremes that I'd gone to try and find happiness on the outside, including money and relationships and weight loss and gym and exercise and everything that people do, all the things that people do to find it. Now, in this experience I had with Michael, it's like there was a beautiful moment where I just felt a complete calmness for the first time in my life. And all the seeking that I'd done, the very thing that had driven me to do psychotherapy, the very thing that had driven me to do all those surgeries, the very thing that had driven me to, doing crazy things for money, having 3 jobs, burning myself out in an attempt to get money to find happiness. The very thing had taken me there. And the very same thing, I'd realized that, that I was okay, that I felt this experience that happened like that. It happened in a moment, you know, it did not happen in a long drawn out working on myself, fixing myself, doing practices, looking in the mirror, giving affirmations, writing gratitudes down, going to meetings. It didn't happen in any of those things. Never, ever did that get me anywhere other than thinking I was more broken. But in a moment of realization, you know, I just saw beyond the story in my own mind. I saw beyond that wallpaper that I talked about, the idea of myself, you know, like there's a part of me that's not broken. There's a part of me that's not damaged. There's a part of me that knows. There's a part of me that's never been damaged, you know, and it's like, and I saw through this, you know, what I call, when I talk to people, the video playing in my own mind where I was the lead character. You know, I just saw that it was a video playing in my own mind. And in the seeing of that, it was like a crack appeared in my whole reality, and all the stories, all the psychiatric interventions, all the addict label, the years in 12 steps. Because at this point, I'd been in 12 steps 22 years, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, 5 times a week, believing I was an addict and that I had to do these things to be okay. I just saw that none of it was true. So much so, on such a deep level, that I knew in those moments that everything I'd been seeking in all those other things was now at an end. I knew there was something in me that knew. I knew that I wouldn't go back to 12 steps. I didn't need to, because there wasn't anything wrong with me. I didn't need to go to meetings to be okay. I was already okay. And I knew that I wouldn't go back. And I was very difficult to, I struggled to find therapists. I had a therapist for 7 years, and I contacted my therapist from LA while I was there, the day after having that experience, saying, I don't need therapy anymore. You know, I don't need to come. And it was like, so certain I was, you know, that I'd experienced this piece, and I couldn't articulate it at the time. You know, I really couldn't say what had happened to me, but I just knew that I'd found something that I'd looked for my whole life, you know, and I guess what I would call it now was a realization or an awakening, you know, of the truth of who I am, not through the lens of the system. And that's why I kind of say in my talks, you know, how the system pathologizes normal human response to trauma, you know, like a lot of bits might piece together here, you know, about what I've said. It's kind of like where I said a child isn't born knowing eating disorders, you know, the programming is installed, and in an innocent attempt to find help, the idea of brokenness is installed into us. You know, it's kind of like, and then it's somewhat iatrogenic. And by that, I mean, it creates the very problem it sets out to solve. You know, so by going into the system, you know, I'm told I've got these unfixable personality disorders, character traits, labels, diagnoses. I'm an addict. I'm all these other things. But they were just normal human responses to adversity. So they were pathologized normal human responses to adversity. They were given a label. And the label, which is really just an explanation, becomes the cause. It can't possibly be the cause because it was only ever a label. None of these are, you know, there's no medical test for mental illness. You know, there's none whatsoever. So, you know, I was walking around thinking these are really things that are wrong with me, not realizing that they were just descriptions of where I'd been at the time, you know, and in the realization of this, it all just fell away. And that was my first experience of being joyful and being content and calm and peaceful for no good reason. Nothing had changed. I hadn't got any more money, hadn't lost any weight, hadn't got a new relationship, but everything was good, you know.
And you bring up something really important, Jason, is the definition of the systems that are put on us. You know, we can question these systems and say, you know what, that's not us. You know, because there's so many misdiagnoses. Like you said, there is no test to prove mental illness. You know, we have symptoms, we have, you know, attitude, mood swings, and, you know, things that they can say, okay, well, we think it's this, we think it's that, but they cannot really be precise and say, you know what, this is what you got. And I think we really need to start putting that out there for mental illness. And that's how we can break the stigma, is by saying, you know what, all these definitions from the systems are not helping us understand mental health, because then people are just going on and say, well, I have PTSD and I have DID and I have BPD, but they don't even understand what these diagnoses are, because they're not, you know, they're not understanding themselves. And I think that's where the miscommunication comes from the doctors as well, and the systems, is that they give us this diagnosis, but they're not even sure if that's what it really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to quantify this. You might, if you're hearing it for the first time, you might think, "What? That's not true." You know, it's kind of like, but I can tell you for certain, right? Thomas Insel was Dr. Thomas Insel, neuroscientist. He was head of the National Institute of Mental Health for 15 years in the US. And one of his quotes is, it says that we spent $20 billion on mental health and we didn't even move the needle. He said there's no such thing as mental illness. It's just a construct. There's one thing, right? Alan Francis, who was also one of the members of the task force, Dr. Alan Francis, psychiatrist, one of the members of the task force that created the DSM, also wrote a book, Saving Normal. You know, and now these people that have been involved in that, don't take my word for this. Look it up for yourself. You know, it's all out there. All this information is out there, but we're so caught up in the narrative that's been in the dominant, what I call dominant oppressive narrative that's been installed into us by the system, that we don't ever look for this stuff. You know, we just believe it, you know, and it's like, these people are leaders in this field and they're saying that it's not true. There's no such thing. You know, there's recently been a study by Professor Joanna Moncrief, who's a teacher at King's College in London. She actually peer reviewed all the studies on brain chemical imbalance for depression. There's no such thing as a brain chemical imbalance for depression. And anyone who thinks they have a brain, this was her words, not mine. Anyone who thinks they have a brain chemical imbalance has been misdiagnosed by their doctor, and they should go back and speak to them about it, because there's no such thing. Now,
Wow.
all this stuff is out there. You know, there's millions of, in my own book that isn't finished yet, but like I wrote, you know, that there's thousands, if not millions of people out there walking around believing that they have a brain chemical imbalance, that are medicated, you know, and they don't need to be. It's like, the last one on this subject, you know, there's a lot more. I could go on forever, but like the Book of Woe, if you're really interested, the Book of Woe by Gary Greenberg, who's a psychotherapist, and he studied the whole development, including Big Pharma getting involved, the DSM from start to finish, the ICD in the World Health Organization, which is the equivalent of the DSM, the development of all the diagnoses and like some of the stuff, you know, the stories that you read in there about how they came up with the diagnosis, you know, like sitting around a table talking about, oh, if you've had this for 3 months, no, it's 6 months. No, how do you measure the intensity of this? And how do you tick 6 of the 9 criteria for borderline personality disorder? And these people really think that they've got something medically wrong with them. You know, it's kind of, if you read that, the whole thing just falls apart. You know, I'm not saying, by the way, that anyone's malicious. I know for a fact all these people have got good intentions, and I'm not saying that people don't present behaviors that are antisocial or destructive. They do, but that the cause of them is not mental illness, you know.
Yeah. And I think we really need to get this topic out there, because I feel the same way with you, Jason, is we need to start researching. We need to start questioning things. You know, when a doctor tells us we have this diagnosis, question that doctor and say, well, why do you feel I have this? You know, kind of understand a little bit, because for the longest time I was diagnosed with I've been diagnosed with conversion disorder. And a lot of times I'm like, okay, well, what is it? For years I asked the doctor, what is it? And they were like, it's crazy in the head. And I was like, okay, so I'm a crazy person. Thank you for letting me know. But they never really let you know what the diagnoses are, because they're just guessing. They actually don't know.
They are. And the other thing about this, I was saying it before, but you kind of pointed out, you know, a person, like, let's say a person, it's more what I would call a measure of where somebody is at, not who they are, you know. But what happens is it becomes a permanent part of their identity. Now, it's like you go to a professional, right, and you say, this is a funny one. I mean, you'll see this. You go to a professional and you say, I'm doing this, you know, this is how I'm behaving, this is how I'm thinking, this is how I'm feeling. Oh, how long have you been doing it for? How intense is it? How long has it lasted for? So they go through the list of criteria in the DSM and they tick it off and they tick it off and they go, okay, here's what it is. They give you a code for your insurance in the US, not in the UK, and they give you a diagnosis, right? And then you as an innocent individual go away saying, I do this because of that. But that, what I've been given, is only a description.
Yep.
It can never be the cause. It was only a description, and it was only a subjective opinion at best. It was only a description to start with. You went there and you described what you were doing. Someone gave you a description that's called a diagnosis, but you then go away thinking that the diagnosis is the reason that you're doing it. How could it ever be a reason? It was only ever a description to start
Right?
with. It could never be the cause. It just couldn't be that.
And I think that's where it hit you, that you didn't need those 12 steps, because there was nothing actually wrong with you. Yeah. You were just hurting. You were from grief. Like, you had a loss that you didn't understand, and it wasn't ever explained to you, because grief is not explained to us. No. We lose people every day, and then we're all confused. What is grief? Well, if we're not ever educated on grief, just like we're not educated on mental health, how can we move forward? How can we really push through those steps, right, to understand?
Yeah, for sure. And again, I want to clarify, 12 steps is beautiful. It saves so many people's lives, including my own and lots of my friends and beautiful people that I've met along the way. But like, at some point you can wake up to something beyond that. At some point you can wake up to there being a deeper truth, that you're not a flawed individual that needs fixing, or you don't have an unexplainable disease that no one can really tell you why. There really is an answer to everything. It's like things can make sense. Like, if you've suffered with a trauma, an experience or adversity in childhood, or you've learned to cope in difficult circumstances, it probably shows up in your adult life as painful relationships, as a difficult relationship with yourself or the world outside yourself. It's kind of like there's always a clear connection between the two things in people that I work with. I've never failed in anyone that I've worked with to see a connection between how they were brought up, what they learned to believe about themselves or the world, and what they're suffering with now. Always.
Well, and then when we get into a pattern too, we're not actually healing ourselves anymore. We're not actually working on ourselves. We're just, it's a routine, right? It's a schedule. It's like taking a pill for the next 20 years. You're just taking that pill, but what is that pill actually doing? Are you willing to take that next step to try and get off that pill, lower the doses of that medication? You know what I mean? Or completely get off the medication. And it's like you said, with the 12 steps, you just woke up and you're like, no, I don't need this. And at no time am I saying that 12 steps is bad. I'm just saying that we need to actually stop the enabling of ourselves and actually step up and say, you know what, let's change. Okay, we've done this for a while now, but we need to find new steps, new tools, new tips. And we have to really look, like, it's within, like you said, wherever it is, in our knee, in our ankle, it just needs to come out, right? And if we don't ever let it out, how do we actually move forward? Because Jason, if you would have never let it come out, you would have never got to where you are today. You would have stayed stuck in that pattern of just saying, you know what, it's me. And you use the word broken, and I use that a lot. And a lot of people tell me, Miss Liz, don't use broken. And I'm like, broken is beautiful, because we all have to break in order to heal, in order to seal, in order to find solutions to grow. So why are we so scared of the word broken? Because we're all broken. We're all human beings. We all break at some time, right?
Yeah, it's just, there's semantics and wordplay and stuff. Some people have attached a meaning to certain words and they feel strongly about it, about what it means. But I think, like, what's important is the sentiment behind what you're saying, is what you're saying is like, broken often. It's like, I heard I know it was a Chinese proverb or something the other day where it was talking about a vase that broke and it got pieced, and instead of just throwing it away, gets pieced back together, and becomes something more beautiful than it was. It's kind of like, because the creation and all the fixing and the glue that holds it together and everything is all part of its beauty, and I think that's what you're saying about the human experience, is that the darkness really points us to light. It's kind of like, it really does. That's why I said addiction is like the lost man's way to enlightenment, because, I could never say that I would wish the loss or the suffering that I had on anyone in order for them to find happiness. But looking back in hindsight, I can feel grateful for what happened. I can feel grateful for the loss. I can feel grateful. I can feel it in so many ways, like the presence that I have with my children, the love that I have for my children, the relationship that I have with them. That's all a result of what happened with the loss of my own dad. I probably wouldn't feel so strongly and hold it so, cherish it so much in my heart as I do. You know, if I hadn't really known what it was to lose somebody, you know, a dad, and how important the role of a dad is in small children, you know, it's kind of like, that's a beautiful gift, right? I can't ever deny that, you know.
So, Jason, I want to get into your tea. If I ask you what your tea is today, what words do you have for me?
I was thinking about this when you said it before. You know, the immediate word that comes to me for tea is therapeutic, and like that might like sound abstract to some, you know, but I just really mean it in the context of the healing properties of a therapeutic relationship. And it doesn't mean you have to pay somebody. Therapeutic doesn't necessarily mean therapist. You know, to me, it means the healing properties of being seen and present in a relationship with somebody. You know, it's like you talked about before, we all want to be seen, we all want to be heard, but you know, that's really what healing is. It's being seen, it's being heard, it's being felt, it's like being noticed, it's the feeling the presence of another human being. Now, what I call in the presence of presence, you know, it's like when you are in the presence of presence, there's such a healing quality to that, you know. So that was my T, you know. E, where I would say empathic, because it's one of the gifts, you know, that I've had, another gift that I've had of all this experience that I've been through, you know. It's kind of like, I feel that I'm so sensitive, you know, to really feeling people's struggles and pain, you know, that it's such a gift to me, you know. And I would say it was achieve, you know, and I think it's because, like, particularly when, like we've talked about with broken and stuff, you know, it's kind of like that you can achieve anything, you know, and it's often the area where a lot of us feel restricted and, like, you know, and kind of stuck and living in what I call pipe dreams, just ideas of brilliance and so on, you know, thinking that I can never make it, but other people can. But actually, we can achieve anything. You know, the only thing that ever stops us is our own belief about who we are and what it would take. You know, it's kind of like, but I've witnessed miracles. I've witnessed a lifetime of miracles of people achieving things that were previously thought unachievable, you know. So I love the word achieve, you know, and I don't mean it in a material possessions kind of way. I just mean in a beyond what you believe true possible, you know.
And what did you give me for the E?
Empathic.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And why that word, Jason?
Empathic is really about kind of a gift for me, you know, about being able to really see and hear people and be with people and sense people's struggles beyond the words, beyond the presenting behavior. You know, it's kind of like not really in judgment or in criticism or in reaction to people that are kind of behaving in that way, but a deeper seeing of somebody hurting, you know, and I think that's been such a gift for me.
So we do have a comment here. I want to share it with you. How do you feel about this comment, Jason?
The process of therapy and self-betterment, a righteous cause. I don't know. What do you make of that? I'll just saw it before I answer. What do you think that means?
I'm guessing that the righteous cause of healing ourselves, right? The process of therapy is different for everybody, and the way that we look at it, right? Because what might work for somebody else might not work for us in our situation. So I think looking for the betterment of therapy that heals within ourselves, again, within, it's in the knee, the arm, wherever it is, it needs to come out, right? So how do you feel about that?
I mean, like everyone, I mean, what's important, I don't think I've really touched on it that much, is that when I was in LA with Michael, what I realized is, you know, that life is an inside out experience. It's not an outside in experience. That life is created inside of us all the time, 100% of the time. All experience is created within. The only outside world, i.e. outside of my mind, that I experience is via perception, nothing else. You know, it's kind of like, so if there's a, you know, it's what Viktor Frankl called in the book Man's Search for Meaning, the stimulus between experience and perception. You know, that's what he's talking about, is perception. So everything in the outside world is perceived by me. That means that I'm in full control of my own experience, you know, and everything. It's never them, someone else, what they did, what happened. It's always what I perceive to happen. Now, in that case, we are all having a subjective experience of being human. You know, that's true. It's kind of like, so whatever works for you, whatever it is, it's kind of like 12 steps works for you. Beautiful. I'm not one to say anything bad. If psychiatry has helped you, beautiful. It certainly helped me at a time. It's kind of like, it's what I mistakenly took from it, without being better informed at the time. So all these things are kind of like were my journey. They're not really a way of saying that this is the way. There is no way. It's kind of the way is the way that you find. It's like it's always going to be like that.
Well, it's with that within again, right? It's
Yeah.
whatever works for you. And I think that's where a lot of healing, a lot of people will say, well, I can fix you, no, nobody can fix anybody. We have to fix ourselves. We have to do the research. We have to look and see what works for us and what doesn't work for us, because like you said, the 12 steps worked for you for a while, and then after it was like, you know what, this is not my cup of tea anymore. I'm gonna go dig a little deeper. So what have you learned about your story, about yourself, Jason, in the process?
One of the things that like people often say to me is, you're the first person that's ever said to me, I'm not broken. I make it very clear, and I know you used the word broken in a different way before, but like what I'm kind of saying is that, they've often interpreted from previous experiences that they've had. This is in a long way of answering your question about myself. It's kind of like that there's something wrong with them. I'm the first person that said there's nothing wrong with you. Everything that's been happening has been your own intelligence responding to life, and that's kind of what the thing that I've learned, is like, no matter what happens in my life, I'm not exempt from being human. I still have my moments for sure. It's kind of like with my kids, particularly they challenge me in the best possible way, to be better. And my girlfriend and stuff. And it's like, there's always a deep knowing that this moment now feels a bit uncomfortable. It's going to pass. And I'm okay regardless. I'm okay losing a job. I'm okay losing my house. I'm okay losing things that I want. I'm okay with things not working out. It's kind of like, they don't feel nice in the moment, but I have a different relationship with my experience. It doesn't define me. It's not who I am. And there's always a natural place of equilibrium to return to that will happen pretty quickly if I don't meddle in my experience. There's nothing I need to do. I don't need to fix myself. I'm having a moment, an emotional moment or an angry moment or something's happening, but pretty soon I'll be restored to sanity, and the knowing of that supersedes all experience. It's something deep inside me that kind of, as I get caught up in something, I just remember and I think, oh yeah, okay, I know what this is, and it's like, and it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't exempt me from experience, but I don't need to be exempted from experience. I'm still pretty okay with my humanness, That's what I feel all this has given me, is that what I call grounding in knowing that I'm okay regardless,
Well, and I think we all need to feel the experience, stop putting a band-aid on the experience and just let it teach us what it's supposed to teach us. Because with pain, it teaches us, right? It teaches us a lesson of there's deeper work to be done. There's something here that's not right, but it doesn't mean that it needs to fix us. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with us. It just means that there's an experience that we have to go through in order to get to the next level.
Yeah, every single struggle, no matter what, no matter how bad another person behaves, every single jarring experience, everything you feel around, everything you have a fear or an insecurity or a pain about, is there to show you something about yourself where you've innocently tried to protect an apparently flawed part of yourself that isn't damaged. It's like, but it's a habitual way you learn to be okay in the world. And like you said, life is just always holding up a mirror to us. And it's like, that mirror is like this, it's kind of like, here's the situation, what happened. It's reflecting something back to me. What is it reflecting back to me? Somewhere where I feel inadequate, I feel flawed, I feel broken, I feel inadequate. It's kind of like, that's what it's mirroring back to me. And then I've reacted to try and cover that up. Every single thing, that's all that's happening as a human being. That's the only thing that will ever happen in your life experience. That's it.
Well, I think as individuals, we've been programmed to cover that mirror.
Yeah.
And not look at the mirror.
Yeah, because we point the finger, right? It's your fault. If you hadn't have done this, if you hadn't have done that, if they hadn't have done this, if this person hadn't let me down again and again, if they hadn't spoke to me this way, if they hadn't have not paid me, the long list of things that other people do, it's kind of like we create that. It's self-fulfilling prophecy every single time, and it's always in service of us discovering that hidden, apparently flawed, separate part of ourselves. That's what it's in. That's why we create those things. It's kind of this is a real difficult for people to look at. It's like, because they go, "Well, I didn't create that. The way they spoke to me, that's nothing to do with me." It's kind of like, there's a gift in it. When you're willing to look inwardly, when you're willing to look into yourself, there's a beautiful gift where life can become more joyful and more peaceful and more calm. Like, when you're willing to look. Until then, you'll feel at odds. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's kind of like, that's all you're going to do. And the only person that's going to suffer is yourself,
Yeah. Well, it's that taking accountability for our lives, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's where we really need to take a charge in our life, is take accountability, take ownership and stop covering the mirror and actually look in the mirror. Because I think that's where the within is. I think the mirror is the within us, that we're always covering up. We're always putting a Band-Aid on. So we need to find solutions on how to heal. And that by just looking in that mirror and saying, hey, this is who I am, and let me fix myself. But it's not fixing ourselves. It's actually understanding ourselves as an individual, right, Jason?
There's two things I always say. One is, the most challenging thing you will ever do is meet yourself. And that's what you're talking about. The most challenging thing you will ever do is meet yourself as you are. And the heaviest thing you'll ever carry is the weight of your own thoughts. That is it. It's kind of like those two things. That's what's going on. The heaviest thing you're ever carrying is the weight of your own thoughts about yourself, about the world, about everything. And the most difficult thing, the thing that everybody runs away from, the reason that we were, a lot of this stuff that we've talked about today is apparent, is because we don't want to meet ourselves. We're scared of meeting ourselves as we are, because we, as we are, don't fit into traditional models of men and women or human beings in the world as they should be, to be successful, powerful, all the ideas that have been impressioned onto us by the conditioning that we've received, so we spend our whole life escaping our true self as we really are.
Yeah. So any final words before we wrap up your tea time, Jason? An hour has just flown by. Like, I could talk for a couple more hours on this topic.
Yeah.
I love the human behavior, because we really don't truly understand it, because we don't truly look within ourselves, So any final words before we wrap up your tea time?
Yeah, today's conversation has really been about looking towards simplicity rather than complexity. The human mind is obsessed with making things more complicated, because it seems like the problem is big, so the solution has to be big. What happens is, we don't look in the right direction. There's 500 or more, perhaps 600 talking therapies, right? That tells you that man is infinitely creative. I think there's 180 plus diagnoses in the DSM. Man is infinitely creative at finding solutions to problems, but no one has ever said, let's look towards a more simple solution. It's kind of like, we're looking in the wrong direction, being more creative, making it more complicated. How about looking to simplicity? It's kind of like, what we're talking about today is challenging, because it's asking us to not be more complicated and not be more complex and not create and go towards these new complex solutions that offer these wonderful answers, but to see that what's apparently wrong with us is just an installation of the conditioning that we've received. And actually, all the answers that we've ever looked for are in the simplicity of just knowing ourselves,
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Jason, for joining me today on Tea Time and sharing this, because I feel that we really got some good education out there for people just to research. And I see a theme, because this morning too, with Michael and Judy, we were saying that people need to start researching, start looking, stop waiting for the answers to fall in your lap. Actually look for them yourself, work in yourself, take some accountability. And I think that's where we're going today with these tea times, is that accountability and searching for answers and solutions, and that within ourselves. So again, thank you, Jason, for joining me on Tea Time. Thank you for all the viewers and listeners out there who have given some questions. Really appreciate it. And if you're watching a replay, please push in hashtag replay and let me know where you're tuning in from, because I always like to hear where you're tuning in from. And I'll see everybody again tonight at 7 p.m. for the final show of this week's Thursday, where Marilyn Crates is going to be joining me, and we'll be talking about grief. So I see an alignment today with all of the tea times just falling into place. So we started in the morning, the afternoon, and in the evening. So the evening, we're going to close it up with some grief. So again, thank you, Jason, for joining me for Tea Time. And thank you, everyone, for supporting Tea Time. And share this Tea Time, because I feel that there's a lot of information in this Tea Time that can help a lot of people. So again, thank you, Jason. Don't leave. I'm just going to close up the Tea Time.
All right.